I was working with a Gen Alpha kid who asked me what Skibidi Toilet was. I told her that it was an internet meme turned into a YouTube show. She asked to watch it, so I pulled out my phone and watched it with her, mostly to make sure she didn't wander off into other videos that I watched that have cursing and queers. I was already familiar with Skibidi Toilet since I worked with another kid who was obsessed with the lore. He explained every hidden detail to me and watched new episodes on repeat whenever they came out, but since I only retained partial information that he was explaining and I wasn't actually following along with the series, I never really thought much about it. But when I was watching it from start to finish with this other kid, it made me think, wow, this series has a really cool narrative on America's political climate. I know it sounds horrendous, but please just hear me out, because I don't have anyone else to talk about this. All the adults that know about this series are just annoying YouTubers that talk too slow, or are trying to sell you shit, or adults that despise it because the sounds are annoying, but I'm not gonna play any of the sounds from that show, so I'm begging you to listen to me. The first few episodes of Skibidi Toilet doesn't seem like much since they're short, vertical clips made for YouTube Shorts and TikTok, but as the episodes get longer and switch to a horizontal format, the story starts to feel like a full-fledged dystopian war narrative. The beginning of this brain rot starts with human heads popping out of toilets for seemingly no other reason besides being random. There's a resistance that shows up with the cameramen, later on speakermen, and even more later on TV men, who are just humanoid figures with different cameras, speakers, and TVs as their heads, where they all create an alliance with each other. They go back and forth with the action a lot, with different titans and more powerful versions of each species, including the toilet heads. Then the toilet heads develop a mind control parasite that corrupts the most powerful of the so-called good guys. They do end up saving him, but the war is still going on since they're still trying to one-up each other. At one point, the Alliance finds some hidden underground facility that could be tied to the origin of the toilet heads. They take down the scientist toilet, but there's one survivor that is implied to be the creator of the toilet heads. The war gets even more absurd with astro toilets, and everyone learns to stop fighting so they can save the earth, but by doing so, they leave it in ruins. The Alliance's base is also in ruins, and Titan TV Man, my number one on my Hear Me Out cake, gets corrupted by astro toilets. I think the series is still going, but holy shit, wasn't that a lot of information? Well, I did leave out an important aspect of the story. This series also has humans. They've always been there, but never the focal point of the story, so a lot of the audience assumes by the time horizontal episodes came out, humans were extinct. But as it turns out, the humans were just in hiding because they were forced to. All the powerful, bizarre, household humanoid objects were destroying each other, and they didn't want to get caught up in that, but they did show up outside. They even help what they believe to be is the lesser evil, because throughout the entire show, they're treated as, you're important when you're useful. Both the toilet heads and the Alliance have seemingly no real empathy towards the humans. Even the audience doesn't even seem to have that much empathy besides, oh my god, they were here this whole time? And then after that, they just move on. If you're aware of the conversation around class consciousness, does this seem familiar? The Alliance might seem like they're fighting against world domination, but they don't ever pay attention to the humans. So who else would they be fighting for besides themselves? Humans aren't a part of the power struggle, but they're most affected by it. The humans lose their shelter, their food supply, their fresh air, because the elites are so busy fighting that they're destroying the world in order to win. Could you imagine a world where the powerful fight among themselves and don't pay attention to the consequences of everyday people? They even have brainwashing in this series, where a powerful, seemingly good entity gets brainwashed and fights against its own allies, much like similar political figures who are viewed as brainwashed when they shift their outward rhetorics to be on the opposing side. In this series, the humans are just living in the shadows, doing their best to survive in a world that they've been forced into. I mean, in this world, humans can't even go to the bathroom anymore without possibly causing harm to themselves. Could you imagine a world where if or when we go into a time of war or oppression, where those basic human rights become luxuries? We are forced into the perspective of one of the lower level Alliance members, and even we don't acknowledge the people who are right in front of us until the humans approach us. Regular people are so often deemed invisible to politicians, or at least the 1%ers, until those regular people step forward. Isn't your mind blown? Of course not. This series has nothing to do with politics. It's a series that has a war going on, but war is also romanticized and sanitized, so you can find it almost anywhere in children's entertainment. But war has always been political, so you can find a deeper meaning within it, even if it's not actually the creator's intention. You don't need an iPad to know that. I actually have talked about Skibidi Toilet before, and have defended its Gen Alpha audience members for liking it, since the rage over Skibidi Toilet is very similar to the rage that FNAF once had for Gen Z. And like FNAF, Skibidi Toilet was never supposed supposed to be this big. It was a brain rot meme that did its brain rot thing. But of course, as it became more popular, the marketable toilets became serialized. I do actually genuinely respect Alexi and his creativity. He's a self-taught animator who improves with every episode he releases. I don't think that he's been using AI, which is always commendable, and he honestly has really good storytelling. Such good entertaining storytelling to the point where he can even make the generation that didn't see this part of the video because I took too long to get to the point to pay attention. I know that when I frantically waved my hands in front of my fellow Gen Z peers to take the red string to connect the annoying overrated internet series to our views on politics, they all sighed and asked me to stop talking because then I became the friend that's too woke. But honestly, I don't really care. Skibidi Toilet is a series consumed by mostly Gen Alpha, a generation that constantly gets media stripped from them due to censorship. Broadcasting services are trying to get defunded by Republicans, books are getting banned, and shows are getting demonized for being too woke. And honestly, it's kind of pissing me off. I do understand that we can't have big, grand political messaging in every single piece of media that comes out, especially when a lot of the time people don't implement them well to the point where it stands out too much, too on the nose, or just ruins the world building. Sometimes people just want to consume something without feeling like they're being preached to. But when you're someone who literally sees everything as political, that's on you, not the media. I think Skibidi Toilet is political because it has a war, and war has always been political, but that's not the fault of Alexi. I think about politics all the time. I find politics in everything I see. My friends will sigh at me when I ask them if they think AI will replace government officials without us noticing because we've gotten so used to the presence of AI when they're just trying to tell me about their character AI chats. Our brains are wired to find patterns and meaning even when none was intended. That's what makes us all free thinkers. So when conservative talking heads call a cartoon woke because it shows empathy, diversity, or basic human decency, but it's actually not because the show is pushing some deep liberal agenda, is because they never stop thinking about politics. They've made woke into a catch-all word for anything that doesn't center them and their beliefs. The most common insult I've received is being woke. I know that some people think it's from the Matrix, but it actually originated back in the 1930s, if not earlier. The term woke comes from African American vernacular English, and it originally meant being aware of social injustices, especially racial discrimination. Basically, you could recognize when a certain group of people were getting and personally, I don't think that's a bad thing. But conservative media never uses the word right. A relevant example in regards to children's entertainment is how conservatives outlets call Sesame Street woke. Sesame Street has been labeled woke for a while now, but I think the first biggest domino was back in 2020. Fox Wannabe News decided to do a segment on Sesame Street, collabing with CNN to host a town hall addressing racism and the importance of inclusivity and empathy. During the special, Elmo and his dad talked about the reasons why people protest and why it's important to stand up to racial injustice. The host of the Fox Entertainment show said that it was teaching children that America was a bad place and it was all their fault. I'm sure I don't need to explain why that's a stupid take, but I will anyways. The whole point of that special was to teach children about the events that were happening at the time, and they were providing very basic values of kindness, understanding, and standing up to unfair treatment. That special was so important because young kids already face so much racism. A person of color in a white community is a lot more difficult to manage when you're a kid and you don't understand why people are being mean to you and to others who look like you. Kids need to be educated on social issues in a way that doesn't fault the country or assign guilt so they can be more passionate to others. That's what Sesame Street did. And it really sucks that certain people don't understand that because earlier this year, there was an investigation into PBS and NPR. PBS was the company behind Sesame Street, Arthur, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and some adult news too, but that's less popular. And NPR was the journalism outlet where I got all my information about the ICE deportations and detainment centers. Some people are concerned that these publicly funded broadcasters might be violating regulations against running commercials. But to be fair, disdain for these companies have been in the air for a while now. Last year, Trump proposed cutting all federal funding for CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the parent companies that keep both PBS and NPR alive. To be clear, conservatives aren't trying to completely destroy or censor PBS or NPR, at least not out loud. The argument is that these companies should be able to stay afloat through corporate sponsors, private foundations, or member donations. But I have some concerns for that logic, specifically when it applies to PBS Kids. PBS Kids is one of the only platforms left where children can watch educational, safe, ad-free programming without weird adults, creepy comment sections, or strange messaging abilities. And in a world where almost every app or website aimed at kids either cost money or was taken down because they got overrun by predators predators, PBS Kids is one of the few safe spaces left that doesn't demand anything from you except like electricity and a Wi-Fi connection. The Ready to Learn initiative, which was funded by the Department of Education, has provided grants to CPB and PBS to develop educational resources for children, particularly in underserved communities. I say was because the Department of Education has been dismantled. Even if that department wasn't completely closed, funding for educational media has always been sidelined for the past couple years. Programs that used to be seen as essential for early childhood development are now being labeled as ideological or too political. It is so incredibly annoying because the whole point of Ready to Learn was to help kids, especially low-income and underrepresented kids, get access to high-quality educational content, where these kids were able to get basic literacy, math, science, and social study lessons that were helping them advance before they even reached kindergarten. Now, because some politicians are convinced that teaching kids to be decent, empathetic human beings is too woke, we lose educational shows, free apps, games, lesson plans, and community outreach that parents and educators rely on. As much as I want to label conservative political leaders and outlets as simply cringe for labeling things like Blue's Clues as woke, I believe that it's actually a strategic thing. Since we get to a point at this thing and blame that thing for all our problems, you can't really call it inhumane because it's an ideology that can't really be offended. So everyone gets to argue about Arthur being too woke because they did a special short talking about racism against black people in 2020 instead of arguing about shit that actually affects people. The same old tired trick that politicians have used for decades where they turn fear into control. When you convince others that awareness and progress are dangerous, you make it easier to justify censorship and silencing voices. I've obviously been thinking a lot about censorship, and I think I'm strongly against it in principle. That said, I don't think every message deserves a platform or should be celebrated. Some takes are genuinely garbage, and I can recognize that, but even then, I still don't think censorship is the answer. I'd rather see a god-awful, factually wrong take be exposed, shitted, farted, and critiqued on than censored. But of course, there's always a line, and that line for me is violent threats. I don't delete comments, even if they're the worst take I've ever heard. But the only comments I've ever deleted were rape, assault, and death threats towards people who were sharing their essay story and who were open about their gender and sexuality in my comment sections. I hold no space for people who have no argument besides I hate you so much that I want to kill you. That's cowardice dog water. But because I have a danger line, other people have their danger lines too. A dangerous opinion that I have is that I believe trans women are women. And for transphobic people, that's a direct threat to their sense of womanhood. I'm threatening all women. I want all women to be assaulted in bathrooms and locker rooms because that's how transphobic people see trans acceptance. So if my opinion is dangerous for someone else, then what isn't a dangerous opinion? Trump cares about America? Elon Musk isn't a Nazi incel? It's really a slippery slope, isn't it? We all think that we're the ones who make sense, and someone else thinks that our views are dangerous. And that's why I believe in critique over censorship. I want the room to say what I believe, and I want others to be able to push back, because if I do say that yes, we should have censorship, it will be my opinion that gets censored. Remember that we are at the bottom of the barrel, and if I don't watch my mouth, I might just consent to having it sewn shut. So I take that anything you say can and will be used against you law incredibly seriously when it comes to politics. I believe that humans aren't garbage, even if I think their opinions or actions are. Of course you can be mad, of course you can be radical, protest, and scream how much you hate America, but don't lose your moral compass in the process. I don't care about being called woke. I don't care if you think everything in this world is woke. Anti-intellectualism is on the rise, and I need you guys to pay attention. I need you guys to be woke, to be awake and aware. It is not a bad thing to ask questions. It is not lame to find the deeper meaning in everything that you see. I know it's so boring and so tiring to keep answering why the curtains are blue, but now all the curtains are on fire, and I can't remember what color they used to be. If we were all on a bus with a shitty-ass driver and you can't afford to get off, would you be awake enough to scream, hit the brakes, or would you fall asleep in your seat because despite all the curbs he's hit, all the guardrails he's broken, you're just so certain that he knows what he's doing? I don't know, but that's just me. Laters.